All right. This bass is full of love.
You are a rock today, aren't you, Dewberry? You are Gibraltar. You are the Hope Diamond.
I'd rather you be saying I was Brad Pitt's wife.
I once had a game class where we were learning the basics of Adobe Illustrator. I was no stranger to Illustrator before then, but I never used it in the way that we did in class. And the way my professor had us learn it was to remake the examples we had using the shape tools and Pathfinder. I still have at least one of those exercises. Here's the original, and here's mine. To this day, this method is still my favorite way of working with vector programs, and it taught me a pretty valuable method when it comes to studying, and that's to copy someone else's hard work. If you're familiar with my channel, or at least the one video that actually got big, why does this have 260,000 views? It's still going up. You'll know that I'm not big on shooter games, but in the same breath, I can most definitely appreciate a good art direction. More than any game mechanic, any character roster, based on Marvel Rivals art alone, I knew it was going to be big. Rivals' style is so striking, so vibrant and fun, the passion for this game just flows from it like a running faucet. I was immediately drawn in with the art style, and I wanted to draw like that too. Or at least figure out how they did it. I mean, look at it. Put it in my blood. I needed to know who worked on this game, and I did what any 21st century person would do and did a quick Google search for the artists, and that was easy. Except it wasn't. I know for a fact there are way more artists who worked on this game, but they weren't listed anywhere. And as for the ones that were, the senior art director's work was locked behind Facebook, and the art director seemed to have no presence online. Oh, maybe that's why. The art of Marvel Rivals is obviously a final product. Very polished, fully rendered. The reason why I wanted to look at these artists' other work is because I wanted to see the unpolished side of them. Through sketches and early conceptualizing, you usually get to see a creative's thought process and the building blocks to how they get to the final rendition. It's like a pseudo step-by-step how-to guide, except it doesn't hold your hand throughout the whole way. In fact, I've kind of come to like sketches a little bit more than the final product for a few years now. I did phone in a friend to see if they could find some of the artists, but I wasn't going to wait around for that. In the meantime, I just made like SpongeBob and worked my way backwards. I gathered all of the official art I could find with some decent resolution and placed them all in a reference app. There were a lot of drawings to choose from, and it seemed like each one was more daunting to decipher than the last, but I felt the best way to start off was by looking at the simplest design there. This has nothing to do with him being the best boy. Don't look at me like that. Now, I don't know about anyone else, but the first thing my eyes were drawn to is that very strong highlight on the left. I think it's safe to say that it's the most recognizable thing about the Rival style. It's a harsh, flat color that contrasts with the rest of the image, and what I love the most about it is that fake glitch effect it has with the red and the teal outline. But besides that, after jotting down all my other observations on this drawing, what came to mind was posterization. And if you don't know what that is, it's this. Except not so drastic. Posterization is just solid colors. There are no gradients or smooth blending between tones, but depending on the severity or the subtlety of the effect, the slightly different shades can give off the illusion of blending. Now, upon further inspection, I suspect there is at least some level of blending going on. But that's okay, because the solid tonal shifts that I mentioned are still pretty prominent, especially on Jeff's stomach. All in all, this may not be posterized, but I would say that Jeff here was painted with cell shading appearance in mind. So knowing that, and after a little bit of nerve-induced procrastination, I finally built up the courage to steal to replicate this drawing. And my first step was to trace it. For the first few minutes, I was just getting a feel for how I would approach this. I was originally going to do cell shading by stacking layers and playing around with layer modes like multiply and stuff, but I figured I should go with the painting route for 2 reasons. 1, I don't have to deal with a bunch of layers, and 2, I always want to get better at painting, and this is as good a time as any to just do some more practice. When I'm painting digitally, I like to use as little layers as possible, since in real life you tend to work with just one canvas. However, I also wanted to approach this somewhat non-destructively, and one layer is very much the opposite of that. I made one layer with all the flat colors, and I used the magic wand tool to isolate the specific color and paint just those parts. So for example, I would select only the blue color on the flat layer, and on a separate layer above the flats is where I would paint. My main focus was replicating the textures and the subtle shifts in color that I saw, which was way more difficult than it looked. While I tried not to use too many layers, there were parts on Jeff's official artwork that were just obviously done on a separate layer. Besides the magic wand tool, I did rely heavily on the eyedropper tool to pick the colors. Because I didn't have to worry about the lines and the color choices, I was laser focused on copying what I see, and because of that, I was figuring out new ways to utilize my brushes, when I need to make a sharp edge and when I need to let it just fade out. That is something I still have trouble with, but I feel like I'm slowly getting the hang of it. In total, this took about 2 hours to complete, and I won't bore you with the meticulous details, but if anyone is interested, I can post a full time lapse separately. And after some trial and error, this is the final result. This is one of those things where when you see it the first time, you think they're identical, but the more you look at it, the more you'll notice the differences. I mean, for my first try, I think I did alright, but my end goal is to replicate this style with my own original work, and I'm not exactly confident in doing that yet, so I decided to practice a little bit more. This time with Spider-Man.
Does whatever a spider can.
Now, Spider-Man is way more detailed than Jeff, and thus, it was way more intimidating to tackle. Something I noticed while I was making the outline for this, and I noticed it in Jeff too, but I didn't really pay much attention to it, is that Spider-Man has a lot of these scribbles, or I sometimes like to call them thought lines. And the way I would describe thought lines is the visualization of finding your drawing during the sketch phase. Okay, how do I explain this? For example, you know how when you want to draw a circle, but you may not be confident enough to draw it in one stroke? You might draw it in smaller strokes or multiple lines to find the perfect circle, and then you erase those imperfections. Well, those imperfections are your thoughts on a page. They are the manifestation of your thought process. Thus, I call it thought lines. Don't think I needed to explain it so thoroughly. Anyway, I looked at all the other samples that I found and I realized they had a lot of thought lines too. That is a very interesting detail that I'm definitely going to get back to. I did the whole magic wand thing and isolated the colors, but unlike Jeff, I did go the cell shaded route. The difference in shading is way more pronounced on Spider-Man, especially the red part where you can literally section off the different shades of red. I even went and made a hexagon texture to match the pattern on Spider-Man's blues. That's another thing that Jeff didn't have that a lot of the other samples did. As I was working, and to be honest, it was feeling a little tedious because of all the little details, I couldn't help but feel that this was really familiar the way Spider-Man looks. Obviously, there's only so many ways that you can draw Spider-Man, but I felt that way for all the Rivals art that I've come across. The art direction looks like an artist that I follow, but I didn't have anything to confirm my suspicions. Until that friend of mine finally got back to me. I fucking knew that he had something to do with this early concept. Okay. Remember when I said I wanted to see the artist's other work, including unpolished stuff? Pyroowdaily definitely has a lot of that. Hisham's line art is very thin and very uniform, meaning it all has the same weight. And this would explain, and I'm pretty sure that they went through multiple iterations with fine-tuning the art style, but this would explain why the line in Marvel Rivals artwork takes a back seat. Now that isn't to say that Hisham's lines are boring, I actually really like how they look. There's confidence in each line stroke, but it's not rigidly clean like you would see in, say, Disney. The thought lines stand out, another thing that we can see and even pushed further in Marvel Rivals. And then you have the coloring where you see he puts extra effort into and he uses a lot of cell shading. He uses a hard brush most of the time to get those sharp edges, but there are also times where you see him use a soft brush. And I understand that he only worked on the early concepts, but my point is, if you're familiar with his work, you can see how he left his mark on Rivals. Pyroowdaily has a lot of art out there, and I implore you to go look at them. He's worked on a lot of different things, including League of Legends, which includes Arcane, and when I think about it, they even kind of have a similar feel. They don't look the same, but they kind of feel the same, if that makes sense. Point is, if you like Marvel Rivals artwork, you're gonna really love Pyroowdaily's artwork. Now at this point, I didn't even feel like continuing with the Spider-Man study because I was too anxious to try making my own artwork. And that's what I did. I feel like Vince is a guinea pig at this point. Rivals artwork has a lot of color going on, and I thought one way to try and capture that was, instead of having a regular flat color base, I'd make a base that has a sort of color jitter going on to make everything pop, and I immediately scrapped that because by the time I was getting ready to do the shadows, which is pretty much the first thing I always do, that color jitter was way too busy. It's a good thing I made a copy of the regular flats before I messed everything up. Because I didn't finish my Spider-Man study and I couldn't fully let go of my posterization comparison, I decided to stick with the cell shading and extra layer stacking. When I usually work, not counting the flats layer, I usually have about 3 or 4 main layers I work with. 2 are for shading and lighting respectively, and the others are for airbrushing, soft shadows, and soft lighting. I've used this method for years now, and it's effective, but I really want to branch out and try different ways to do things, like how I've been using the magic wand tool this whole time. Instead of having just one main shadow layer, I had 3 or 4 layers ranging in intensity, and vice versa for the lighting for each color section. I also played around a lot with the layer's opacity settings and tried out different blending modes. I ended up using a lot of layers. I find that I am averse to using so many layers because I like to have things at least somewhat orderly, and even though I name my layers pretty often, that didn't really help this time around because I didn't have any real system and the naming conventions were really all over the place. Don't ask me what the difference between mid and semi is, I do not know. But even with that slight grievance, I couldn't argue with the results. The layer stacking looked really nice, and I had extra fun adding my own thought lines in certain places. The biggest thing I was nervous about though, and if you've been paying attention to the time lapse on screen, you probably noticed it, is that I left the skin for last. The reason for that is it is my Achilles heel. The face is the most difficult thing that you can draw, that you can paint, etc, etc. Unlike the rest of the sections, I relied heavily on the one layer method that I mentioned earlier in the video. I tried my best to stick with the cell shading with Vince's face, but it felt like I was learning a foreign language. Not that the painting was any better, but I was kind of feeling myself with the Jeff study and... Misplaced confidence, is that you? I want to say I spent about 2 hours on just the face alone. I kept starting and restarting, I had to redraw some things, and I almost scrapped this whole video because of this part. Anyways, here is the final result.
You like that one? Get out of here with that shit.
So if you take the face away, I love it. I did all this practice, I took notes and stuff, I did a pretty meticulous job studying, I think, and right at the end, I flop. Do I think it looks completely terrible? No, but I just don't think it matches the rest of the drawing. Even so, I think I honestly did a pretty good job with the rest of the image. This really just highlighted my lack of skill when it comes to faces, and all that means is that I need to draw more of that, especially when it comes to understanding the contours of the face and how the light falls on it. To finish this off, I did add his powers. I did a little experimenting with the glow and what have you. I was also going to try and match the typography for the introduction screen that every character has, but I think I'm done. I'm done. What did I learn from all this besides get good? I liked the thought lines. I might honestly incorporate that in my own stuff going forward. And I'm still going to test out the layer stacking and see if I can get a system going that's a little less chaotic, because I really do like how the bubble coat came out. That's my favorite part. If NetEase comes out with a, what do you call it, an art book, I'm definitely getting that. I really like art books. But yeah, I'm done. I'm tired. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. I felt like his head was a little small. Is that better?